Good afternoon, America. Well, apparently, Commonwealth of Virginia has a brand new slogan. For 50 years, Virginia was told the country, Virginia is for lovers. After last week, Virginia is for Republicans, because in one of the most politically humiliating legal smackdowns of 2026, the Supreme Court of Virginia looked at the Democratic redistricting referendum, looked at the process behind it, looked at Virginia Constitution, and basically said, absolutely not. In a razor-thin 4-3 ruling, Virginia's highest court struck down the Democratic-backed congressional redistricting referendum as unconstitutional, ruling the General Assembly violating procedural requirements laid out in the Virginia Constitution when lawmakers pushing the amendment onto the ballot. And just like that, poof, gone. $64 million of Democratic money vaporized. An entire political operation denoted. And the best part, this was supposed to be the Democratic master plan to grab 4 additional congressional seats and help retake the U.S. House of Representatives for the 2026 midterm. Oops. Now, before we continue, let's explain what exactly happened here because the national media is trying very hard to bury the details under the emotional talking points and selective outrage. Back in 2020, Virginia voters approved a constitutional amendment creating a bipartisan redistricting commission. The idea was simple: take map drawing power away from partisan politicians and put it into a supposedly balanced commission process. Democrats loved that idea, right until the regained power. Then suddenly, the people who spent years screaming about protecting democracy decided democracy needed a little adjustment, a little tune-up, a little temporary suspension of the rule. Because Governor Abigail Spanberger and Virginia Democratic backed a constitutional amendment that would temporarily bypass the bipartisan commission and allow Democratic-controlled legislation to redraw a congressional district mid-decade. Translation: the referees were inconvenient, so Democrats wanted to become the referees. And according to the analysis, the new congressional map would have shifted Virginia from a 6-5 Democratic advantage to a staggering 10-1 Democratic congressional map. Now remember, this is the same Democratic Party that lectured America every 15 minutes about threats to democracy, the same party that spent years saying Republicans were destroying norms, the same party accusing President Donald Trump of trying to federalize elections through the Save America Act and the other election integrity efforts. Oh, remember that? Democrats said elections should be left to the states. Well, the states rule. And suddenly Democrats don't like the states' right anymore. Amazing how that works. The legal problem here centers on timing and constitutional procedures. The Virginia Supreme Court ruled the General Assembly improperly advanced the amendment after early voting of 2025 election cycle that already begun. The court determined that the violation constitutional requirements tied to when the amendment may legally pass through the legislation before going through before the votes. In other words, the legislation jumped the gun. They bypassed the process, and then they got caught. Now, Democrats keep saying, but the voters ruled for it. That argument sounds like MSNBC. But here's the problem. You cannot violate the Constitution in order to place something on the ballot, then pretend the violation disappeared because people voted on it afterwards. That's not how constitutional law works. If lawmakers could ignore constitutional procedures whenever they wanted, the Constitution would become meaningless suggestions. And that is exactly what the Virginia Supreme Court said. The court effectively ruled that the process itself was tainted from the start. Now let's talk about the money, because this part is absolutely incredible. Democrats aligned organizations poured more than $64 million into referendum campaigns. $64 million. And according to reports, groups aligned with the House Democratic leadership, including organizations tied to U.S. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, helped bankroll the efforts. One Democratic aligned group reportedly spent around $40 million alone supporting the measures. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not grassroots democracy. This is a corporate political investment portfolio. And after all the money, after all those ads, after all the speeches, after all the propaganda, the Virginia Supreme Court looked at the entire operation and said, unconstitutional. That sound you hear tonight? That is the sound of Democratic consultants crying into their catered sushi trays. Now, naturally, Democrats responded only in the way modern Democrats know how to, by attacking the court. Almost immediately after ruling, Democrats began discussing changing the markup of Virginia's Supreme Court itself. Because apparently every institution is legitimate until Democrats lose. Then suddenly the institution becomes dangerous. Sound familiar? We've seen this movie before. Now they're talking about reshaping Virginia's Supreme Court. What's next? Lowering the retirement age for judges because they didn't get the political outcome they wanted? Oh, wait. Some Democrats already floated that idea. How convenient. Imagine the outrage if Republican proposed restructuring a state Supreme Court immediately after losing a major election case. CNN would run 12 straight hours of democracy in crisis. They would be candlelight vigils. College professors would start crying on TikTok. But when Democrats do it, apparently it's called protecting democracy. Now, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries criticizes the ruling and signaled Democrats would continue fighting throughout appeals and redistricting efforts nationally. And Virginia Democrats are now talking about appealing this case to the United States Supreme Court. Good luck with that, because here's the uncomfortable reality Democrats don't want to hear tonight. The Constitution still matters, procedures still matter, and courts, believe it or not, sometimes still enforce the law. The Democrats' biggest political mistake wasn't just about redistricting map, it was about arrogance. The assumption that the rule only applied to other people. The assumption that if they wanted to spend enough money, scream loud enough, and wrap everything in saving democracy language, nobody would notice what they were actually doing. But Americans noticed. The court noticed. And now, Virginia Democrats are left standing in a political wreckage of self-inflicted disaster. And here's the irony that makes the story even better. Democrats spent years warning Americans about election interference. Then they tried engineering congressional maps to create a near permanent partisan advantage. They screamed about protecting institutions, then immediately attacked the court after they lost. They said elections belong to the states. They threw a tantrum when the states ruled against them. That's the story. That's the hypocrisy. And that's what America learned last week. Virginia Democrats tried to bend the Constitution. They tried to bend the congressional map, and the Supreme Court of Virginia bent none of it. So now what? Well, Democrats say they want the U.S. Supreme Court to save them. But honestly, there's probably nothing the Supreme Court is going to do. The procedural violations identified under Virginia's own constitutional framework, the state court ruled, the law is the law, and the reality is simple. The Democrat broke the rule of redistricting, and they got caught. So I guess that's the only thing left for Virginia Democrats to do now. Start campaigning, because contrary to popular belief, you actually have to win a vote. Have a good day, America.